I wasn't so sure about this Archaix thing, but AIX is certainly worth looking into.
I'm most impressed that Jason is not going to tell you something, he's going to show you.
Archaix shows us if you record enough facts, the answers just stare you in the face.
A man who knows the facts is unafraid to joust with contrary opinions. That's Jason.
I can't have that dude on my show. You know how many guys I've had on here who are running from that dude? Be a mess.
Jason says being wrong gets us closer to being right.
You got to break free or die trying, guys.
Archaix showed me how to see if there was a tater in them onions.
Listen, Archaix isn't one guy against the Matrix that's dumb. No, it's a family of souls waking up.
If I've learned anything since finding Archaix, if something is true somewhere, it's probably true everywhere.
Jason said if it's true, we can see it from multiple different vantage points.
So I broke pattern and went up there and slapped that guy. Total pattern break.
If you get stumped, you got to break pattern.
Jason says you don't need to know how to read, you need to know how to think. I think that's where I went wrong.
Jason figured it out. People are smart and they can decide for themselves if something is true or not.
No, I don't have anything to hide. I just don't want Jason anywhere near my accounting files.
There's a bunch of us who don't listen to Archaix. We signed a different deal. I think it's AIX or something.
Safe. We block all those who claim we are censoring content. We are not harvesting your data, creating dossiers on the public, and selling your info. Why would we do such a thing?
Seeing the Easter Island pictures of art next to the Göbekli Tepe art is all I had to see. As a chief legislator, that's all a trier of fact needs to see to know Göbekli Tepe is nowhere near as old as they are claiming.
That Jason showed that the zodiac isn't even old, that the Greeks invented it, blew my mind. I'm a Christian now, and our scriptures tell us that stuff's evil.
Jason was publishing about the Mayan long count not ending in 2012, way back before 2012. This dude is shaking the nest. His discoveries on calendars and ancient moon and day count calendars is putting some of these guys to shame.
Remember, we are actors. We are paid to lie. We are rich because we are good at what we do.
Anyone at this point who can't see that the Jews copied Babylonian tablets to write Genesis is blind. Jason's Dark Scriptures playlist shows this perfectly.
That the New Testament is a collection of forged texts put together centuries after the events they depict.
This guy has called the entire ancient aliens community to debate. Like Tyson, they ain't getting in the ring. Jason says one who is properly informed is not easily deceived. I would like to see Jimmy Corsetti or Matthew LaCroix debate Jason about this Atlantis dating issue. No one's really interested in Bill Carson's opinion anymore.
His findings on the procession hoax, the change of the year from 360 days to 365, man, this changes everything in archaeoastronomy.
You know, I'm not a doctor. I have no medical background. I'm an actor. And even I know Atlantis was the 13th century BC. Jason has dropped massive data sets on the Old Testament, not even being old, but from the Greek era.
You think we took you for a ride? Wait till the new Christian Reich takes control. It won't be American, and it sure ain't Christian.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, you know, when Jason showed that the Jewish calendar was completely made up, I mean, you know, damned, how are we going to know what year it is now?
Yeah, the Shar being a day and not a year totally murders a lot of books out there. That's the reason these guys don't want to talk. Jason killed their little pet theories.
It all came true. Jason said I was going to be a part of fake news, just like Billy Carson.
I tried to sniff Jason one time, but Big John stopped me. I think Jason would have been into it, though.
Don't forget, we are actors. We are paid to lie. We are rich because we are good at what we do.
Hello, family. Let's get that audio check done real quick. Got a special guest in the house. I'm eager to bring him forth. He came with pretty high recommendations. I know there's some crossover. There's several of you that already know who he is. Sounds good? Thank you. Awesome. Hiya, Victoria. Victoria, I could not believe on Twitter that you did not make a comment under that little discovery I made in Hesiod's Theogony. Come on now. Hesiod specifically said 27 centuries ago that the phoenix duration was 9 times that of the life of a raven. Man, you better look up how long a raven lives, because we got 138 again. How did you not see that, Victoria? How did you not comment on that? You of all people. That's all right. I forgive you. Without further ado, guys, audio's great. I'm going to introduce the Greek. He's got his partner. He's got an online buddy. They do a lot of presentations together. I can't remember exactly what they call them, but they're unique. And a lot of people tune into this. And we're going to go ahead and introduce him right now. His contact information is in the description box. But several people have mentioned that he's very knowledgeable on the topics he discusses. Out-of-the-box thinker, and that's exactly what Archaix is about. We don't give a damn about people being right or wrong about it. It's all about thinking outside the box and making people stretch out of their comfort zones to look at some of the information that has been presented to us so we can understand the difference between fact and fiction, or at least when we're being told something, we can always understand that there's more to the story. So without further ado, we're going to add the Greek. How you doing, sir?
Oh, great. Greetings, Jason, and greetings to your listenership. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I see you have Charles Ocelli, somebody you've done many presentations with in our chat right now. Can you give us a little background about what you and he have done before we go into other topics about just your work?
Sure. On the work aspect, we started a project about 8 years ago called Ocelli and the Greek. We met on American Freedom Radio, and I've been calling in and was a fixture on many of the early radio, let's say, platforms and the heyday of the internet, like 2010 to 2013, 14. So we met later on and decided to do a little collaboration. We're kind of like Laurel and Hardy and Abbott and Costello. You know, people listen and they wonder if these two guys really like each other, but they sure put on a pretty good Sonic event, right? And there's no rules. We pretty much covered, our first series was about, I think, 20 or so presentations on 20 different subjects, 2 hours each, and kind of like shook a lot of people. And how the moral, the current project you will find on ocelli.com. It's called Rated Y, The Unculting of Humanity. Right? And we can explain that. And that's pretty much the project. I'm very much not a public figure. I don't want to be. I think we have all of like 6 listeners. It's more than that, but and I believe sort of like, the word coincidence. Coincidence means to coincide with. If you're meant to hear what we're talking about, you'll be there. We don't really promote that much. Right. I'm not saying don't come. Of course, come. But it'll just, if it happens, it happens, because I'm going to be doing these things anyway. I'm not doing them to make public presentations, so it's a very different point of view. The main crux of my discussion is that everything you need to know, you must start within arm's reach of 5 feet of within your reach, visible reach, and just reaching out your arms and gain and glean as much definition of that around you. The other basic premise is that all subjects, all fields of study are still wide open. Medicine, law, science, chronology, all wide open. What's been going on is the common people have their common jobs, and if they want to extend and learn about another field, they go to a quote-unquote expert in any field. And I found out more than 30 years ago that these experts don't know any more than most people, and they're telling you a story. And we're going to...
You're speaking my language.
And now we're going to uncover that simply by going back to the reference materials that have been memorialized that they're supposed to subscribe to, and they don't. We're talking about medical, legal, scientific, cultural, history. Another thing we do, I use a lot of the term lawful. People, they don't understand that. I'll be bringing that up, if something is lawful or not. Lawful is an agreement and a body of work, even an idea that you can gain without engaging in commerce. You don't have to buy anything, right? So for example, once you learn that a triangle has 3 sides, and that's how it's defined. And you pick up a book on geometry and it's telling you it has 4 sides. Well, that's not a lawful book, right?
That's right.
Now, one of the main things that I've been doing is lawful timekeeping. And this is your, by the way, okay, I just want to stop for a moment. I got to say this. The crux of your work that I've noticed that I need to just say, the periodicity of the Phoenix, the periodicity of what might be called Nemesis X, and the periodicity of what might be called the dark satellite. Okay, let me just say this. Thank you. Okay, when I heard that and they saw what you presented, I said, okay, I don't know what else he's doing, but he did that work for me. Right? You know what I mean? When you hear something that you know has been checked out like a math problem, you can run it backwards and forwards, and it's like you actually, I don't know the guy, but he did that work for me. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
So basically, lawful. I got into a lot of lawful timekeeping because I also get into a lot of biblical stuff, and not what you're talking about, which I might contend with to a small degree, but overall, I see what you're doing. When I get into biblical stuff, it's not from a religious point of view. Maybe we'll continue that. But what's interesting is I found out that right now, in terms of timekeeping, you know, I joke around with people like, you don't even know what day it is. If you ask someone what day it is, and they say anything between Monday and Friday, you know, Sunday and whatever, and January through December, that's the Pope's work schedule. I call it the Pope's work schedule, right? Because you have work week and weekend. And in terms of what time it is, time of day, they rely on this wind-up toy called the clock, or the digital derivation. You know, that thing on the wall that tells you what you should have time for?
Right.
That's okay. Those are not lawful, because let's say you go underground and you come up to the surface, or in a coma for 3 months. What day is it? Can you go outside and see or figure it out? Or do you need a calendar that you have to buy, right? Or use? Same with the clock. So from the biblical, let's say, economy and ancient economy, this is what I came up with. And also I found out that it transpires and crosses over in what's been memorialized in academia. By the way, if you have a secret and you want to keep it secret, go ahead and publish it and put it in the public library. That's how you keep it a secret, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So what I found out was very simple. And this, I'm going to give you some old examples, and then we'll cross over to academia, how it's in their own texts. For example, for thousands of years, people settled their debts or typically returned home when the full moon came around, right? And it was a commercial beacon. And today, don't you get your billing cycle on a monthly cycle, right? It's pretty close, because it turned, and let me just include this again. I'll bounce around a little bit because it's a very parallel thinking kind of thing. Not only are we looking for something that we don't have to subscribe to some man-made thing, let's say, or that we have to pay for, are we looking at it from a point of view that it actually works and is viable? And what time is for? There's no such thing as time. Time is just how you record events, right? You could record them however you like. It has to be also the timekeeping method you use must have the ability to attain a certain precision and accuracy, right? So how this was done was visibly by putting a stick in the ground, right? And when the shadows moved, like a sundial, is how you kept time. And you can actually keep time this way with shadows. If you extend that stick or a lever, the more you can graduate it, for example, a sundial, and you can actually record down to 10,000ths of a second, a millionth of a second, the longer that line extends, right? You just graduate it into more fractions. So the reason I brought up the full moon, which is the new moon, because this is how it was done. Because how do you measure the moonlight with a stick in the ground the same way? And academics say, well, you can't use that. Well, of course you can, because you could actually go outside on a moonlit night and you could see, you know, if you have people that are visually impaired, actually see better, and the shadows are sharper. So the full moon is actually the new moon when the month begins, right? Now, let's just move forward. Why do they call the new moon the dark moon? Now, back from the mid 80s to the early 90s, I used to spend a lot of time at the library reading room, the main library in New York City. And I found out I was in the mezzanine reading room librarian that I was hitting on, real cute girl once. She says, you know, this is the room where, this is where Tesla used to sit, same place. And then this guy, Charles Fort, used to sit here. So I was like, oh, cool. And so, you know, maybe if I sit
Charles
here,
Fort sat there for 20-something years.
yeah, he was a fixture. And she's like, here, 40 times. Because, you know, you didn't have to buy magazines. The library used to have them. They put them in a big bar, you know, along the binding part. So anyway, I started looking at all these references, and part of me was like, you've got to have a good memory. See, it's kind of like if things are important, you'll remember them. Taking notes is important because that's memorialization. And I started going over this chronological stuff. And what it seemed like was there was a big diversion, a big break, and a turning point. And I found out, just with all my research, that everything that could have been known was known by the late 1890s. And I'm going to get to that. I'll show some proofs on that. But let's go back to lawful timekeeping. So the full moon is the new moon, and why the dark moon is called the new moon essentially is because in certain Babylonian, Egyptian, you know, parts of Egypt and Babylon were like sister cities, and the priesthood had degraded to the point of superstition, and when the moon disappeared and it was dark, they went to the leader, let's say the pharaoh or the king, and kept him in his chambers. He wouldn't leave until the crescent reappeared, because if it didn't reappear, what are we going to do? What if the pharaoh was out on a trip, right? So he had to stay in the palace and watch Netflix or whatever for 2 or 3 days till the crescent reappeared. So when the crescent reappeared, it meant that the cycle was still going, and they called it the new moon. But the actual way measurements can be taken is only with the full moon, because that will actually cast a shadow over a sundial, and then you have its own alignments. And if you actually look at the Pope's work schedule, there's a bunch of drift and intercalation and all that. But if you use the full moon as the first day of the month, now you're on your way to how to reckon your months. Now, here's one thing that leads to another. Time must be broken up with precision and accuracy. When does the day start? Well, I'll just give the day starts at noon, high noon. It doesn't start at sundown, doesn't start at midnight. In some Islamic cultures, they think it's at dawn. And how do we reckon that? Without giving an explanation, I'll tell you. The level of precision, again, that is attained at the marker is the most high at noon. The other thing is, if you look, let's say, from things that have been memorialized, go to the book of Genesis. There was evening, there was morning the first day, and that's repeated. Okay, evening, or the word edeb, let's say, when does evening begin, or the evening, when things are even, and when does it begin? At noon. And it ends when morning ends. When does morning end? At noon. And pretty much when you carry over on other cultures, you'll see that all of this has been put away, and it's either sundown. Now, when you see sundown, like for example, in the Jewish economy, they consider sundown to be the end of the day. But how do you reckon that? There's no way to precisely reckon that. For example, in India, even today, you could look up India sundials, and some of them are as big as a house to measure moonlight and daylight. So if you look at the academic vernacular in Astronomy 101, they will say that the day starts at solar noon, but for the people, it's civil midnight. That's kind of like when they started writing dictionaries, they didn't know how to define words. So they wrote something like, for example, in the old dictionaries, oats. It's what we feed the horses in England, but it's the staple of the people of Scotland, right? It's a put down, right? So when you look at any of the Timekeeping Authority websites, I think it's the one in Colorado Springs Naval Observatory, and then Greenwich Mean Time, try to find where they talk about Julian calendar time, and you will see that they profess the day starts at solar noon. So basically, the lawful timekeeping works around that. Now, if you want to go back to a biblical reference, let's say, in the book of Nehemiah, I think it's chapter 7 and chapter 13, you get 2 examples of it being at solar noon. The first example is Nehemiah's complaining that the people are still coming into the city with commercial activity and the Sabbath has begun. Because look under the gate, it's dark under the gate. right? So the Sabbath started. Now, most people will say, well, that's just a gate. Well, the gate meant the city wall, and those walls were about 12 foot thick, and it's oriented north south. So the only way you can have darkness under that shadow, that archway, that masonry archway, is if the sun is directly overhead. Because if it's early in the morning, the sun is coming through. And if it's late in the afternoon at sundown, the sun is coming through again, right? Only at noon. Now, how do we look at it on another chapter? He says, do not open the city gates until they get hot. I want them to get hot, and the Sabbath will be over. Then open them, right? And that can't be sundown because the heat done already came and went. And it can't be morning. Well, if he's saying that in the morning, you have to wait around till noon again. So there's these little hints that you'll find in literary works that have been memorialized. A very popular one that gets people sort of in the generation that I'm in, I was born in the mid 60s, is when you, before the electronic banking convention, when you went to a bank and gave a check to the teller after 12 o'clock, she counted it as the next day. I don't know if you ever remember doing banking before any electronic convention, but anyone who's more than 50 or 60 years old will remember that. So this is more of the lawful chrononomy. Like you're a chronologist, which is knowledge of time. A chrononomist is the law of time. Like how do you keep?
Let me interject because you are saturating us with so much information. You're like me on my presentations on things when I'm going off. It's awesome, but I need to interject on one thing. There is confirmatory evidence in what you're saying, at least in some cultures of the world, that noon was the beginning of the day, in that people went to sleep when the sun was the highest and hottest in the sky in Middle Eastern cultures. That's when people went to sleep. They went to sleep during the day, and when it started getting cooler in our evening, the progression of their day, that's when they got up. They had their meal. They got a whole lot of work done, and then
yeah, it was the siestas. They still do them in Europe.
Yes, yeah. Many parts of the world are just too hot to be active from noon to 6 o'clock in the evening, and that's when they actually slept. So it's very interesting. That is confirmatory.
Absolutely. If you observe the culture will always reflect what's being taught. Give you an example. In the Pacific Rim Islands in the turn of the 20th century, a lot of Christian missions were going to these islands. When they landed, they discovered the population, everyone was topless. By the way, in a society like that, the men just look at the women in their eyes, right? And anyway, there were Christian missions, so they set up these church tents, and they saw the women, and they handed out T-shirts because they wanted them to show up on Sunday morning in the church tent wearing a T-shirt, right? And these are topless women. So Sunday morning comes, women show up, they got the T-shirts on, but they got holes cut out with their breasts hanging out. You get the point? The culture is so important that will override anything new that comes, right? So the condition that we're in, we'll talk about a few other things that we're in right now in terms of what's knowledge-based and how we see things, has to override a very, very strong cultural undertone. Because humans, I mean, by the way, I can go on and on about the lawful timekeeping. I just want to throw down a bunch of hints and cover a few subjects that might be even more critical, if that's all right with you.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I'm all ears.
Okay, great. The cultural overtones are the hardest thing to overcome, right? And you can see with humans, because we're the only creatures that are subject to all external input. What I mean by that is this. Let's say you got a little puppy dog, you know about those. And after it weans from the mama, it gets adopted by a band of gorillas. And you go back and retrieve that puppy after 5 or 6 years. Guess what? That puppy comes pre-downloaded with everything it needs to be a dog. You throw a stick, it'll chase the stick. It'll bark at the squirrel. It'll act just like a dog, even though it was raised by gorillas. Now you take a baby, human baby, and after about 3 or 4 months, give them to a band of gorillas. By the way, you could probably nurture off a female gorilla. And to go adopt that baby, that human baby, after 5, 6, 7 years living with gorillas, you let him in your house, he's going to jump on your kitchen table and throw a poo right there. He won't resemble anything like a human, because all of his tendencies, his mannerisms, his gestures are, guess what? Just like a gorilla. Why? Because it's all external input. Now, we get very little download when we come into this world. Everything has to be copied and learned. And the animals seem to have, look, I had a litter of kittens, and they would eat, and they would all walk outside after they ate, and they all synchronously washed themselves. Like, who taught them how to do that? You know, who teaches see, they come pre-download. We don't. It's kind of like a computer. You've got the hardware, and then you have the operating system, then you have a program, and then you have files. So let's mix it up. If you have files and you put it on just the hardware, it won't take. You need, right? You need the program and you need the operating system. So the culture is our operating system. So you could understand a culture and still have no programs and no files. You know, we're talking about descending order, operating system, then programs, and then the files. The files would be the little things that we take in and hold on to. Because if someone asks you, what color is that car? And you say it's blue, you just needed a small, minute impulse of blue. And then you compared it to, before you said BLUE, you compared it to everything that you have downloaded or filed away as being blue in that file cabinet called your head, let's say.
Right.
And that's where we very, very rarely see things. We just try to do a quick comparative analysis to the stimulus we're getting to something that's been stored in there. By the way, you know, memory is not in your head at all. It's all remote. Just like let's say you're at the beach or the park and someone's got a little radio and they're tuning into a jazz station. You think if you go bust that radio open, there's a little jazz band in there playing? Not at all. It's picking up and receiving, it has the ability to do that. So the cultural aspect is so powerful that, for example, again, if you go to something biblical, it says, well, don't make fun of those people because you were like that once too, right? There's a culture that we have some good, quote unquote, moral aspects that you always have to follow. And very often when you start learning and more and you want to share, you wonder why it's being rejected, right? That's one of the hardest things to throttle and manage within oneself. But when I give a lot of examples of these things, I have to show how it's in the culture, because some things cannot be objectified. But what I'm saying is trying to objectify, and just some things cannot be objectified, like the ether, for example, the substrates of this construct cannot be objectified. It would be like, let's say your existence is a video on a screen. It's very difficult to objectify as a video character the pixel. Very difficult, right? You have to come outside of that construct. So what Greek, some people call it Greek speak. I was going to do an interview about 15 years ago, a very long Greek name. If you say it backwards, you get a hernia. So she said, I'll just call you the Greek. And that it's stuck. And other people say, oh, have you heard any Greek speak? So this is the basic Greek speak. What we're speaking on now, I started in the early 2000s, the 10s and the 20s. So it's cracked 3 decades, which, by the way, just in terms of timekeeping and keeping age, when you're born, you're in your first year, aren't you? Right? Even though you're a day old.
Well, I mean, when you're born, you haven't even reached your first year.
You haven't completed it, but you're borrowing those days from the first year. You're also in your first decade. You haven't completed it, but right. So this, when you read a lot of older things, they said he was 20. It's actually he just turned 19. He just turned 19. So 19 plus 1 day, you're taking it out of your 20th year. It's more physical related, right? So if you need 13 eggs and they only come in 12. 1 dozen packages, but you got to go home with 13 eggs. You're going to open another dozen package and take an egg out, and he's going to say, hold on a second, you got to buy that. You can't just take 1 egg out, right? It's kind of like a physical reference. So the timekeeping, there's many, let's see, I don't know, where can we go next? Because we cover medical law, we cover physiology. Hey, let's do one thing here. This is a secret. Everybody cover your ears. Actually, the first part's not a secret. The second part's a secret. Jason, I'm going to share something with you, okay? We live on this earth. Now, I'm just visiting here taking notes, okay? So I can't talk about my preferences or opinions. By the way, you're in front of a computer, stupid rectangle. I call it the stupid rectangle. If you have browser access, I want you to look up the word nice, because NICE in an etymology, ETYMOLOGY, the first website. Type in the word nice and read the definition. And I could tell you what it is, but when people look it up themselves, let's say someone's driving along, that's why I don't do images and things. When you look it up yourself, it has like 70% more punch. I don't know why, but if you're able to do that, etymology, look up the word nice, N-I-C-E, and read the meaning if you can.
Let's see. I'm doing it right now.
Okay, because I was going to define the word opinion, and I said, because I hope we're not having a nice conversation, and you tell me what the word actually means. See, words are tools, and what their definitions are is how that tool is supposed to be used.
Would you like me to read what an
Etymology.
online search of the word nice produces?
An etymology. Go to etymology.com, E-T-Y-M.
Well, I didn't. I just Googled etymology of the word nice, and it instantly gave me the Latin word.
Oh, yeah, they don't like to do. If you just click on what's this? I didn't. Did you get asked about AI taking over Google searches? I didn't get a memo on that.
No, but it's definitely doing it.
Yep. Well, if you go to ETYM online, that website.
Oh yeah, I'm there. I got it right here.
Type in the word nice, and what's the definition? First 3-4 words of the definition.
Foolish, ignorant, and frivolous.
Yep. Now have a nice day. What are you actually telling your cohort or whoever you're speaking
Damn,
to?
how did I not know this? How did I not see this? I studied dictionaries. Hell, I damn near wrote a thesaurus before I even knew what a thesaurus was. I wrote one in prison.
You probably, yeah, but the thing is, yeah, you had seen that word was too familiar, so you were relying on previous concepts of that word. Right? Let's say it's an example.
The etymology of the word nice is foolish, ignorant, frivolous, senseless, from the old French nice, careless and clumsy.
But the reason I picked that word is, if you did a transcript of the words that people use every day, I think that word pops up more than a few times every day in people's vocabulary. Don't you think?
You're absolutely correct. Yes, it does.
Yeah. So I hope we're not having a nice conversation. And when people that know what that word means, we can be standing in front of other people and says, "How's that guy Jack you met out? He was very nice." And they're like, "Really? I'm sorry to hear that."
Man, all this time I've been saying nice, and wow. I'm really kind of worried about you telling me about other words in my common vernacular.
We're going to get into, well, don't get worried. As long as you have internet, I'm going to ask you to pull some things up because it has more punch when you do it, or whoever I'm talking. Now, here's the thing. This is just like the girls in the islands that cut the holes in the t-shirts, right? No different. So, all right, the word opinion, when I was saying I'm just visiting here and I don't want to give opinion or like tell anyone what's my favorite color or I like strawberry ice cream or whatever, because opinion is a judgment or decision based with no knowledge, right? That's why when you go to these courts, the judges can only give opinions because they don't know any law, and we're going to get into that. So when we start looking at how things should be defined, I want to go back to the secret I wanted to tell. Actually, the second half is the secret. The first half is this: we're all walking around in this realm, whether you believe the earth is flat or round or whatever, the new round is flat. By the way, I do have firsthand experience with both of those. I'll give them real quick. Back in the early 80s, there was a construction boom and they were looking for surveyors. They go out with transits and theodolites and you measure elevations and lay out highways and all that stuff. And at the time, they gave you a 2-week free course and it was $25 an hour, which is almost $100 an hour today. And I said, "Oh yeah, I'll do it. Free course and all this. I'll try it out." It was boring as hell. I didn't do it, but I took the course. So we went out and started shooting angles to lay out roads. And we found out that we couldn't shoot a triangle that was less than 180.5 degrees. Triangle is supposed to be 180. It was impossible to do that using benchmarks and things that were there for many years. And the instructor says, "Yeah, because what you're measuring is the Earth's curvature." And I said, well, let's try it again. And we had a formula for the curvature. Okay, so I did notice that. All right, now in architecture, we threw what's called a plumb bob, a vertical line. You look out the window and you look at a building across the street, a stone building, and down the street, another stone building in New York City on 5th Avenue, and it lines up to that plumb bob. There should be a curvature, but there ain't. That plumb bob, that vertical plumb is vertical, so that means the Earth is flat.
Man, I've never even thought about the plumb line. The plumb line would be a frame of reference against architecture several miles away. There's no way that architecture could be vertical.
That's right. Well, what would happen, it would exaggerate just like the sundial. If you want to measure
I hate it when people figure shit out before I do.
Well, we're all here. Yeah, and everyone's listening. This is not the secret part yet. So,
wow,
okay, no, check.
That's amazing. I'm not going to
Well, the
forget
plumb
that.
bob also exaggerates the curve, right? Because it's a lever. It's coming off the curve, so it'll make it seem even. Okay, here's the other thing. I was in Blythe, California. There's a master machinist, and he also grew barley feedstock, and he had a lot of acreage. And this is the border of Arizona and California, and they had these ditches, irrigation ditches, running for miles, more than 8 miles, and you couldn't see the water moving, but it was moving because of a very, very gentle slope. These irrigation ditches. And I was like, what about the curvature of the earth? If you're going against the curvature of the earth, the water's going to run the other way. He says, no, we never figured that out. We could run these ditches for 45, 50 miles. We just level them out 1/8 of an inch every 30 feet, and the water will move. And I'm like, gosh darn it, what happened to the curvature of the earth now? So I've experienced both. So, but here, is it a duality? It's not a duality. It's a perceptive experience. It's based on filtering and perception. Now, let's go back to what leads to a secret. You ever notice when you heat or cool a room, whether you're heating or cooling, the heat always goes to the ceiling and the cold always goes to the floor? Always, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So here's a secret. When you're down in the valley and it's real hot, if you climb a mountain, same day, same location, it gets colder and colder. Because in nature and all natural systems, you have a densifying heat that goes down and a rarefying cold that rises. Now, let's go back to the human body, and I'm using this as an analogy. Let's say you call them, they're called doctors. I don't think they deserve that title. I just call them medical technicians. Hey, I can't see you. You're not feeling well. I can't see you. I have to make an appointment. What's wrong with you? Well, I've got cold feet and a hot head. Oh, you're not feeling well because you're supposed to have a cool head and warm feet. But wait a second. I thought heat's supposed to rise and cold's supposed to go down. Having a cold feet and a hot head is not a good health condition, is it? Not at all. Right? So, but someone will say, hey, Greek, I want to debate you on that because when there's a campfire, I put my hand on there, that heat's rising up through the chimney. I said, that's right. Because when you have a natural system that promotes life by increasing compounds and making more complex systems, let's say from a small, simple compound to a more complex one, the energy emitted from that will always be a rarefied rising cold and a densifying heat that goes down. So let me ask you there. That campfire, are you building up that wood or breaking it down in that campfire? What process is going on there? Oh, I see what you're saying. It's breaking down the wood, right? So the heat's going to rise. So what I used to do is call the university physics labs and the air conditioning engineers through town every day. I say, hey, has anybody called you guys yet? You design HVA systems, right? Heating and cooling. Yeah, we do. I said, how many calls did you get yesterday for people demanding a unit that puts out a rarefied rising cold and a densifying heat so they don't have a hot head and cold feet all year round, for their boats, planes, homes, and all that? It says, well, nobody ever called for that. Oh my gosh, this must be a planet of morons. I'm in trouble, right? You should be demanding that, right? You should be demanding that your interior, your what do you call it? Your units, the HVAC makes a rarefied rising cold. I'm not talking about a fan blowing the cold up and heat. That's what you do for ceiling fans. You change direction, right, during the seasons, right? I'm not talking about that. Something that would work like an artificial sun. When you say artificial sun, they think bright light. It has nothing to do with light, because when you go into high altitude, the sun gets dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. It's a transformer, just like the transformer. Anyway, that's another situation. We'll get into that real quick later. So that is the secret, by the way. Whenever you have a rising coolness and a descending warmth, that is a system that is engaging in processes that are creating complex molecules. What's another way of saying that? Growth. When things are growing and when things are vital and alive, right, you will have that energy exchange working in that direction. Now, why isn't this brought up more and demanded? Right? Now, what do you think will happen if I build a unit that you put in your room that all year round keeps at the same temperature? The cold goes up and the heat goes down. You'll get a knock on the door and they'll say, son, if that works, you're a dead man. Why? Because it leads to other things, other ways of thinking. Like, one thing I get into a lot is physiology in the human body. Why? Because that's HQ, that's your headquarters. If HQ is full of deception, anything, HQ is where everything comes out of. So if headquarters only allows deception coming in and deception going out, that ain't good. Can't be good. So one thing I get into is the definition of words and terms. And I ask people, do you know the difference between the soul, the spirit, and the body? And they're like, yeah, the soul and the spirit are the same. I said, no, they're not. The body, let's set that aside. That's in ancient Greek would be the sarx, right? Or we'll leave that aside. The carne, let's say, right? Because it has its own virtues, like I just mentioned. Let's talk about the soul and the spirit etymologically very quickly. When you look up soul, in any dictionary, it'll tell you it's the spirit. When you look up spirit in any dictionary, it'll tell you it's the soul. It can't be. By the way, dictionary, those were put out fairly recently in the scope of time. Why? The elite wanted all the their subjects, to speak in a uniform way. That's why dictionary is about your diction. That's why when you look up a word, the first thing it shows is phonetic spelling.
Pronunciation.
Yes, and then it shows the common usage, right? So when we say definition, let's go back to how it was used. So very simply, let's use the soul. The soul is simply the metabolism of the living body. So when you look at the ancient languages, whether it's Egyptian or Hebrew, so that was the neph or the nephesh. In the Greek, it was the pneuma. The metabolism, the act of being alive and functioning as a living unit, one of the first things to find out if someone's in trouble is, are they breathing or not? That's the pneuma, right? So that's why, for example, the PNU prefix, you'll see the words like pneumatic has to do with the movement of air, pneumonia. PNU means soul. So it's your metabolism. So in order for someone to die, the soul has to die first. Your metabolism, in other words, your nervous system, the cardiac system, the pulmonary system has to fail. When it fails, the body starts to go into decomposition, chemical reduction. Okay, so the soul is interchangeable. For example, if a dog gets hit on the head and it passes out, you can actually go to that dog, let's just maybe, or someone in a swimming pool perform CPR. You can put your soul, meaning your breath, into that body. And once they can do it on their own, now they have their own soul working. It's very simple. So all of our souls are transferable. You can do CPR for a dog. By the way, in certain veterinary things, that's taught, right? You can transfer. So anything that is breathing the same air as you has almost an interchangeable soul based on the body design, for example. So the soul is the metabolism. So when you see a bird that's alive, that bird has a soul. When that bird is taxidermied and up on your shelf, it doesn't have a soul. It just has the body. Now, what the hell is the spirit? Now, the soul is tangible. We've got stethoscopes. You can measure breathing, temperature. You fog up your glasses, right? Okay, so what is the spirit? Well, the spirit, it would be the ruch or the ruach in ancient Semitic languages, or in Greek, it would be the psyche, and it's intangible. The spirit is the mind, is nothing tangible. That's why the PSY prefix, psychology, psychotic, psychopath, that is all of the mind. That's what the spirit is. So transferring of spirit is intangible. I'll give you an example. If I have, let's say, the Beatles' White Album on a CD or a record, I'm going to give that to a materials analyst, and he's going to analyze it, give him a few $100. A couple of days later, he gives you a 3-page report on what that CD is all about. And he's going to see the types of materials, the reflectivity, the grooves cut in it, but he can't tell it's the Beatles' White Album strictly by looking at the material. If he has the proper equipment to play it, like a CD player, he'll put play, and guess what you're going to hear? The Beatles' White Album. It's completely undetectable. The spirit is not detectable by physical means. It's completely intangible. It's what makes you, me, and every creature that has its own personality. It's the hardest thing for me is to eat chickens, because if you raise chickens, they answer to their names and they have personalities, right? So that would be the individual spirit. So anyway, the spirit is the PSY prefix, the psyche or the psyche, and the pneuma is the soul, which is your metabolism. So I've been on calls and someone passed away and says, I wonder if their soul went on. I said, no, their soul had to pass first before the body could be declared dead. So in other words, we're not speaking, it's very hard to speak the same language when people, once you know right? If you go to a transmission rebuild shop, I don't care how familiar you are with tools, automotive tools, they're going to have tools on the wall hanging that you ain't never seen before, because not many people rebuild automatic transmissions, right? I'm not talking about something that far, like defining words in a far off way. I'm just saying, why don't we just take common words and use them how they're supposed to be used? If a word is a tool, the definition is how to use that tool, essentially. Now, on the basis of the human body, because that's headquarters, okay, I want to get into the body. It's very, very important. It's paramount, because that's how we perceive things from. Now, Jason, if you came over and you got in the car with me here, you're going to say, what's this map taped to your dashboard with all those red dots on it? And what the hell are these bright orange earplugs for? You got them all over the place. I said, yeah, let me tell you. You see this map right here? Each red dot in this area represents where there's a hospital, a medical office, or a doctor's office. So what's the purpose of those earplugs? They're real heavy-duty earplugs. I said, well, when I'm driving down the street and I see I'm near one of these red dots, I got to put the earplugs in, because if I don't, the quacking is so loud, my ears are ringing for 3 days. Okay, and that's why this is what. And I'm going to show you something here. If you're on the internet, type in, for example. Well, actually, let's give a story before we do this. Right. I happen to go to a medical technician, and he says, I want to take your vitals. Right. I want to take your vitals. Just sit down over here. Right. He's wearing the white coat and all that. By the way, you know, when they say we're waiting for the doctor to come out, the door opens, you see have some man or woman standing there with a white lab coat and all that. And you're so happy to see them, you might be nervous. They call it white coat fever. You know, you get nervous, you know. What would happen if someone came to the door, he had a bone in his nose and body paint? What would you do then? Wouldn't you run away? Right? Most people in this culture would. So I'm going to, before this is over, you're going to see something very similar to that. So anyway, I go to this medical technician. I got my earplugs in, by the way. And he says, I want to take your vitals. So he has me sit down, and he takes out a piece of string. It's not a regular piece of string. It has to be a medical FDA approved piece of string. And he wraps it real tight around the end of my finger digit. And he has a medical clock, because a regular clock won't work. It has to be FDA approved. And he hits a certain timer. And then he looks at my finger, and it's about bluish kind of purple. And he holds it up to a chart with blues and purples. And he says, you got type 2 stupiditis. I'm going to give you a prescription for that. Now I'm like, wait a second. I see what you're doing here, but what if I never tied a string on my finger? Would I have that condition? And the answer is, you'll figure it out on your own. So what they do now for diagnosis is, I want to take your vitals, Jason. Sit down. They inflate a cuff on your arm. And so what's that for? Blood pressure. Blood pressure. Yeah. So, you know, you could look up what blood pressure is supposed to be. And then he says, oh, your blood pressure is high. Your blood pressure is low. How could you tell blood pressure if you never put that cuff on me that restricted the flow of blood? How would you tell? Well, you can't, son. Okay. Now, if you start looking at how many people are on blood pressure medication, you understand what marketing is. Okay. We're going to get into this a little bit more. You're going to be like, okay, things are far worse than we've been told. Way worse. But now that you know it, you don't have to participate, is my point. You still can. It's all voluntary. Now, there's do me a favor, Jason. Go to your browser and go to images. Type in cross-section of intestines and blow it up and look at it. You know, it'll be an anatomical drawing. Cross-section of okay, you got it. Now I want you to study that. Now do a split screen or whatever, and do a cross-section of a steel-belted tire for a car. Steel-belted tire for a car. Do a cross-section. Just type in cross-section, steel-belted radial, whatever, and look at that. And well, of course, they both serve the same function. Now,
you say a cross-section of you want a specific tire?
No, any tire. Just put in cross-section of an automotive tire. Any tire, doesn't matter.
All right.
And look at that image.
I actually put the images on my desktop if you want me to show them.
Yeah, if you'd show them, that'd be great. Yeah, in case someone's driving down the road, right? You know, but if you're in front of one of the stupid rectangles, you'll see it.
Right.
If you look at those two, you'll see structurally they're almost identical. And in purpose, what is the purpose of a car tire? It keeps one type of pressure in and the other pressure out, right? When that wall is breached, the tire is rendered useless. Okay. So now when you look at the cross-section of the intestines, I want you to look at the actual materials of the walls. They'll show you cells with no interstitial spaces. The cells are completely tightly packed. How does anything get absorbed through that? Does any material go through that? Ever? Now, if you do a cross-section of the skin, cross-section of skin anatomy, cross-section of lung tissue, cross-section of the stomach, cross-section, what I'm going through is this. Our bodies are completely sealed. We have a pathway that goes from the mouth to the anus. There's like a tunnel that goes through your body. Everything else, the intestines, I can read you a dozen letters from cardiologists, neurologists, and nurses. Actually, I have one recently. Basically, I'll paraphrase. He said, Greek, I heard from your sonics what you said about the human body. We've just analyzed intestines and stomach, and not only are they completely sealed, they're hydrophobic. They repel water. And what you've said is true against all of our training. Now, if you look at that, if you look at the cross-section of lung tissue, so what are they saying? Nothing is absorbing. By the way, in medical parlance, if anything passes through the skin wall, the lung wall, the intestine, or the stomach, you end up with a condition called septicemia, when you will probably die. You're completely sealed. So what holds everything together? Again, do you know how just you had the discrepancy between rising cold and descending heat with what we're used to? Everything alive has a biological vacuum, some kind of a negative pressure that holds it all together. So when something comes alive, it has an inward pressure. I call it a biological vacuum. I'm the only one speaking on this. And when you look at the intestines or the lungs or the skin, when you see material, for example, when you eat, the food passes through the intestines and you gain nutrition through that, let's say, in the inside of the body. How does the food do that? Well, it's done by induction. That's why when you remember it earlier, I said that everything that could have been known would have been known by the 1890s. You go look at medical books in the 1890s. Things were done by, all health concerns were by what? Induction. What is induction? Okay, I have this induction stove cooktop. It's a stove top. It's glass. It's got a pot of rolling, boiling water. Okay, I move the pot to the side. I put my hand right on the glass. It's room temperature. I put the pot right back on. It starts rolling, boil again. It's that energy is right. It's non-physical. It only affects certain things, right? So the same with air. When air goes into the lungs, by the way, they say we're oxygen breathers. By the way, I want to say this. I don't think you know how right you are when you talk about vapor canopy biology. What I'm saying here.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, you're moving so fast that I literally started taking clip notes, so I don't interrupt you. But I got to interrupt real quick because I was about to write a vapor canopy statement here, because if what you're saying is true, the heart is not a pump, it's a vacuum.
That's right. Well, hold on. No, it's not. It's something different. Let's jump to the heart. If anyone who wants to check out what the heart is a guy named Frank Chester, like Chester of Drawers, Chester, and you look at his old videos. Now, the heart, I could tell you flat out, is not a pump, it's a brake. Because if it were a pump, it's a real shitty pump. Because when they what are those stimulators they put on people's hearts? They put them in their body. They run off a battery.
Right.
Pacemaker. Yeah. They've done with volunteer subjects with pacemakers. They have a remote control and they speed up the heartbeat. And every time they sped up the heartbeat, the stream of blood that went through the heart slowed down. And what kind of fucked up pump? I just used a medical term. Anyway, what kind of messed up pump is that? That when you speed it up, it slows things down. Now, what it is if you look at, there's over 40,000 miles of blood vessels in the body. About 2,500 are pertinent that you could see with your eye. Now, if you go to a finite analysis computer, the big supercomputer that you use to design jet aircraft and bridges and whatever, and you start putting in the human body, so many liters of blood, 50% solids, 98.6, 2,400 miles, less than a millimeter in diameter average, it'll tell you need 1,200 horsepower pump just to move 20 miles. What happened to the other 2,400 and whatever miles? So what it's actually doing, as the biological vacuum is naturally pulsing, one of my mentors, Trevor James Constable, wrote about the cosmic pulse of life.
I read it, and I promoted it on my channel.
Yes, very good. I'm one of the last people that worked with him directly on the weather work.
Paul Tice personally?
No, I don't, but I know he was very close with Paul Tice. Is okay. Someone asked, people are asking me to write a book. I have 12,000 pages right now. And I said, I really don't want to write a book and put it out because when you're an author and you put out publications, you're presuming that the audience has reading comprehension.
Yeah.
Right? So for me to make that presumption would be silly. So I just stick with sonic events. I'll throw a hint out. You listen. I've done 24-hour lectures on all this stuff. To people perfect. Here's the thing. You know how we talk, I've heard you speak about challenging let's say the standard people, having a debate with them, right?
Right.
Okay, now I've presented to doctors, lawyers, and everyone has agreed. They've all acknowledged it. So I never had to say, I'll debate you on this, except for a few academics. Now, when you challenge someone in a debate and they don't answer, it's essentially an academic duel. In dueling, under the postal code, means you got the memo. If you refuse a debate or a duel, you lose by default. But the price of losing is shame. You were publicly shamed if you backed out of a duel. So an academic wanted to debate me, and I said, no, I'm just going to coach this 12-year-old for 5 minutes, and they're going to debate you. And he said, you can't do that. You have to debate me. And I said, how about I just grant you the win? And they're like, you can't do that. You can't do it. I can mess with them. But here's the thing.
I get it.
They're in shame because if under the postal rule, if they got the memo, whether they admit it or not, right, they lost. They're all testicle and no shaft anyway. So people say you say they have balls, Greek. I'm like, no, well, balls make you tough. Betty White said balls make you tough, but a vagina, no, that could take a pounding. But anyway, that's the medical talk coming out of me. Little lascivious, but whatever. So Paul Tice. No, he would be the Book Tree, San Diego. I have Earth for Dummies.
I don't know. I don't know if you were the one he was referring to, but recently when he and I were discussing Trevor James Constable's work and if there were any follow-ups, because we were discussing Andy Lloyd. Andy Lloyd wrote Dark Star, then he wrote Darker Stars. Okay. And the only Andy Lloyd's research is very profound and it supports simulation theory, but he would never admit that. He's a uniformitarian. But it's cool. I love his work, even though he's not interpreting it the way I would. Well, Trevor James Constable is somebody I promote, and when I'm telling my own community about the work of Trevor James Constable, I'm like, listen, guys, there are things in our skies that can be photographed and have been photographed, and Trevor James Constable's work is profound. He shows pictures of these things. They're like living amoebas, organisms in our sky that create phenomena. So when we were talking about that, Paul told me somebody followed up that research, and I'm guessing he was referring to you. I don't know.
No, actually, I'm doing more of the weather side with Wilhelm Reich, weather engineering. And I have some people we've been working with. And this might sound crazy, but I have the receipts of people. A newspaper would call and say, I heard you could make rain. Well, it's a dry season in LA right now. Make it rain in 3 days. I'll print this article today that I told you. And if you don't make it rain on Thursday, you got a gun in your face. I'd bet. Okay, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday comes. It rains an inch in 2 hours in LA, and I guess this guy can really do the rain. And he published some stuff that I asked him not to publish online. Main thing I've been doing, even though I don't want to do it anymore because people love disasters. If they don't have a disaster, they got nothing to talk about. Hurricane abatement. When a big hurricane's come in and they evacuate everyone and all that, we can make those go away. And it's funny watching the weathermen, and they're like, well, why did that hurricane just stop? It's not moving. And then it just, it must be wind shear that made it go away. That's like saying a 4-year-old put his hand out and stopped a semi-truck. So we play around with that. The last one I did was Hurricane Lee. And that was quite a fight because it was completely artificial. There were some good guys that sent some of the resources to do it, and it's a lot of work. The weather is engineerable, and and I'm continuing Trevor's work and also Wilhelm Reich's work. My first mentor in around the year 2000 was a guy named Joe Blankenship, and he was Wilhelm Reich's driver when he was here. And I learned a lot. He had a lot of his personal stuff. I have a lot of Trevor's personal stuff. Before he passed, he sent me boxes and boxes of his paperwork, his own personal stuff.
Your aversion to being a public figure is now explainable to me.
Well, yeah, we'll get into a little more with some stuff that you could do. If you can't build it in your kitchen, you shouldn't be building it at all. That's what the professional people, the academics trying to play. Oh, we just made this new discovery, this new material, but you need a $200 million lab to make it. That's totally senseless to me. So anyway, if we look at the human body, it's completely sealed. You could just look at all your cross sections and it's working by biological vacuum. Now a plant, you got to water plants because they absorb water through the roots. Do the same thing, cross section of rhizology, which is root study, and you'll see the roots are completely sealed. As a matter of fact, go out and pull yourself a green onion or something out of the garden, clean all the dirt off and get a fine water bottle sprayer and spray the roots while the plant's still alive. Do you see them sucking up the water like a sponge, or does the water bead up on the roots like a freshly waxed car? It beads up. Right? So there's no absorption going on. Now, the part that's important is this. When you get a cut or a wound in the body, just like a car tire, you suffer loss of vacuum. And the faster you can make that tight and increase the pressure there, the faster that will heal. And let's just go this for a moment. I've had people send photographs. A little girl goes out the back door. You know those security screens with the welded screens, and sometimes they leave a sharp edge? She got her foot caught on it, tore her big toe completely open. Everyone's like, take her to the hospital, take her to the hospital. And he says, no, we're going to try this. And they wrapped it real tight. The next day, it looked like a scratch. In 3 days, it was completely healed under a lot of pressure. But you have to know how to do it. You have to wrap it very tight and let the blood, how do you let the blood flow back in, right? You don't want to wrap it like a tourniquet. There's techniques that we get into for that. So the other thing is this about the human body. Oh, one more thing. The vacuum. Okay, when people are feeling sick, you notice how they get mucus and congestion in their sinuses and all that. If someone's really congested with mucus in their sinuses, they also have a lot of mucus in their colon area, by the way. Anything that's completely open. What the body's saying is, hey, dummy, I'm losing vacuum, so I'm building up this mucus to increase vacuum. And the medical technicians, they prescribe things to break up that mucus. Now, I'll give you an example. Jason, look up what holds the baby in a woman's cervix when she's pregnant. When a woman's pregnant, baby could fall out, right? So what's keeping it closed? What's keeping everything in there? I'll tell you, it's called the mucus plug. You could look it up. It's called a mucus plug, and that's to keep the baby in the womb. Now,
okay, stop. You're overwhelming me. Hold on.
No, we shouldn't be overwhelmed. Just flow with it. But go ahead anyway. Go ahead.
You're in your flow. But I'm hearing, listen, I process information a little bit differently than most people, but once I have it, I've got it. I got to wrap my mind around a concept. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying this is new to me, and the whole mucus deal, it does make sense. So I have to ask you to take it to a more explanatory level as to what is the remedy. Because mucus is my problem, all right? Mucus is my problem a couple times a year. What is the remedy if I'm losing vacuum? What do I do so I can I can breathe?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Gosh darn it, you're going to say to yourself, I was more right than I thought I was by the time we finish. Because it's all about, you just keep the vapor canopy in the back of your mind. Keep that file drawer open because you're going to be reaching into it a lot more than you have after this, hopefully. Now, this is how we remedy something without even having it cause, the allopathic medicine treats the symptom, right? Okay, so how do we prevent that from happening? I'll give you an example. You're living in a cold place, okay, let's say northern latitudes or something, and suddenly you start eating food that's grown in a warm place. You like bananas, you like tropical fruit, sugar. That food that you start intaking is grown in a warm place, and it's going to adjust your body chemistry to living in a warm place, thin blood, looser cellular functions, and all that. So your body's going to start, the food that you're eating, because it's not grown in that latitude, will start adjusting your body to living in the lower latitudes, and you're going to start losing vacuum. Now, let's do the opposite. Let's say you live in the tropics, and it's trendy to eat salmon. I want some of that salmon. I'm in Ecuador. So you get it imported from Alaska, right? And you start eating that salmon. You're in a tropical place. That salmon is going to start changing your blood chemistry to living in the Arctic. You're going to turn that AC way down. It's still going to be too hot for you. I'll give you an example. I met a lady 20 some odd years ago. She's my wife now. And it was fall here in the Southwest, which is not that cold, but she's wearing a jacket. I'm out in just a long sleeve shirt. And she always complained about being cold. Well, I go over to her house and she's got a banana on her counter, a couple of those little things you hang bananas, called a banana tree, So,
Right.
anyway, and I said, what's that? She goes, bananas. I like eating them for potassium. Oh boy. Got rid of the bananas, went out and bought some salmon, poached it. I said, eat this for the next couple of days. How are you doing now? She goes, I'm coming over. I'm in a t-shirt now. Right? Because, so let's say it's getting cold where you are. Start eating things that come from a cold place. By the way, when you go, it was popular to go to Alaska and work on the pipeline back in the 70s. And when you were hired from the lower 48 to go work in Alaska, they gave you a cut sheet, instructions. For 2 weeks before you come up here, we want you to get some Cool Whip and corn oil, pour it in there and eat 2 tablespoons of that a day, 3 times a day to adjust yourself to the cold weather. Because what do they eat up in the Eskimo, the Inuits? Fat, right? But if you eat that in the tropics, right? So what you eat. So for example, if you have an all year round perennial thing of mucus, something is disturbing your ability to create a vacuum, or you were born that way. In other words, some people just have trouble with that, just like one leg might be shorter than the other or whatever, right? Slightly. So you have to work on that. So the easiest way to increase vacuum is to be in harmony with your environment. So when it's warm outside, you eat food that is grown in a warm latitude, or you can always eat cross latitude. Get on the map and run your finger across the latitude all across the world, and you can eat all that types of food stuff that's grown there. Now, what's going on, things get worse. Like let's say someone lives in New York and it's winter time and the children got the sniffles. And the medical technician or the news says that vitamin C is good for that. Well, what happens when they take the oranges and the tropical fruit? Makes them worse. Oh, so now you got to take this decongestion, right? I want to go back to also food is you're not, you know how they say you are what you ate, what you eat. It's more like you are what you ate 10 days ago, right? Because it has to get processed. So basically, eating seasonally is a cure for many, many, many ails. A lot of diseases in the body, things we talk about, are like tumors and rashes and things like that. Those conditions, by the way, and maybe for more of a private talk, I can get into what's really going on in the medical and how heinous it is. But things that develop in the body are no different than someone setting up a roadblock to prevent traffic from passing through. Now, when you see a roadblock, do you say, oh, let's get an armored vehicle to bust through? Or let's go find out why there's a roadblock and mitigate it so we could freely move the traffic again, you see? So the CANCER word is no different than a roadblock being put up, because on the left side of the body, the energy moves down. On the right side, it moves up. And certain foods will change that. You know the principle of yin and yang, right? Yin is expansive and dark and soft, and yang is contractive and sharp and hard. This is everything we eat has a counterbalance like that. So in essence, what would be a remedy is no remedy. What you do is watch what you eat. So in the summertime, you eat cross latitude foods and foods that come from warm places. In the wintertime, what happens when people get sick around what they call the holiday season? Well, a lot of sweets and candies and stuff like that. Where does sugar and chocolate come from? And where are they eating it? They're eating it in cold places, right? So they're not feeling that well.
That's a really good point. It's also another what supports what you're saying is honey is good, but if you really want to get the maximum benefits, you need to focus on local honey.
More local, but cross latitude. Cross latitude is the key. We are a latitude range. For example, let's go to the real high latitudes. Go around the map. Everybody wears the same stuff. Looks, they're right. Eat the same stuff. Go along the tropics, all around the map. They eat the similar. It's cross latitude eating, I call it, and that will pretty much take care of 99% of people's ills. Now, you got the school teacher that comes home and she says, "Oh, I caught a cold from my children." Right? In class, you hear that all the time. I caught a cold, right? Now, there's something called germ theory. Now, virus stuff is anyway, something called germ theory. Now, if germ theory were true, that it's a little bug called a germ that makes you sick.
Right.
Now, listen to me carefully. Listen carefully. Wouldn't that render all refrigeration useless and redundant? Hold on. Because don't we put things in the refrigerator to retard the growth of those little things called bacteria? Yeah, and it works. So why do people get sick in the winter when all those little germs are dormant? It doesn't make any
point.
sense.
Good point.
And that's why it's not that. It's so third grade comes home, teacher, oh, I got a cold from one of my students. Well, what's really going on the weekend, they don't have school on the weekend. I want you to hang out where they all shop, and you'll see the school teacher's pushing a cart, and she's getting, in the wintertime, she's getting bananas and tomatoes and things, right? And you see all the children's moms and shopping the same stuff. But oh, you know what? The math teacher from India didn't get sick, and the science teacher from China didn't get sick. Let's go follow what they're eating. Are they at the supermarket getting bananas, or are they eating more cross latitude food from where they came from? The strong culture, you see? So also what you talk about breaking pattern, like for example, I caught something called the circus flu because I have a niece, she's a sword swallower in the paranormal circus, and the conditions that they live in are very harsh. And when I met her, give her a big hug and all that, I started not feeling well because the way you're most likely going to get sick from someone that has the same blood as you genetically, brother, mother, father, cousin, niece, always that way, because that's how plagues are created, by the way. When they said but anyway, I broke the flu by just having a very high quality piece of chocolate, like one of those $12 candy bars, you know. And when I ate that high quality chocolate, it just changed my entire system. It just zapped me, like getting your finger in an outlet kind of thing. And that's how I change pattern, right? Because I never eat that kind of stuff. So sometimes just a rapid intake of something very different will help. That's why, for example, someone will try a new remedy. Let's say a normal American who's used to popping pills and things like that gets a Chinese remedy, some kind of root. They boil. Oh, that really worked. But the next time it didn't work the next time because it was really changing the pattern in their body, not the root itself. So you have to learn how to discern that. And we get into that with the sonic events we do. We have tremendous success. And the stuff I'm talking about on the human body, again, I have spoken to maybe several scores of professional doctors. All of them are in agreement. And I know I'm not going to ask them, why don't you do it? They just tell me, I just can't acknowledge what you're saying.
Right.
They cannot acknowledge it. The legal stuff is even worse, but here, I don't know if you want to get your channel canceled, so we can continue on the medical stuff.
Listen, if you got some really intense stuff to talk about, that needs to go to Archaix TV.
That's what, just tell me when to stop. I think we're going to stop on the physiology right there, because what's going on, I could tell you right now, the diabetes, type 1, type 2, completely fictional. AIDS, completely fictional. Does not exist. And the PCR does not exist. It's just as fictional as anything. But to make a long story short, when they were doing the injections, I went out with someone, and there was a table set up with nurses in public, and he started saying, "Oh, what you're doing is this and that," the typical anti-vax stuff, right?
Right.
And they were laughing at him. "Oh, this guy wants to get people killed. This is one of those wacko, loose nuts anti-vaxxers," right? And they're all laughing. So I go up to the nurse quietly and I say, "Before you administer that, are you taking into account body weight, gender, blood type, and race?" Within 2 minutes, she goes to her assistant, says, "We got to pack up and leave right now." And they close that shop down.
Wow.
So when you get a whatever, are they taking your blood type into account, your body weight? And, for example, why did I mention race? If you know any anesthesiologists, you could run this by them. I got a 300-pound black man and a 120-pound redhead with freckled woman.
Right.
And they're both coming in for an appendectomy. Do you know that the anesthesia dose that's required to put the redhead 120-pound girl with freckles down in anesthetic for the operation would kill the 300-pound black man?
Wow. Why is that?
Well, it has to do with blood type. It has to do with race. There is such a thing as racial medicine.
Okay.
For example, when they started putting out Prozac and certain other things like that here in the U.S., it was quite popular. But if you're in Korea, Japan, you took that, you died.
Wow.
Yeah, look it up. It's medical racism. It's very real. It's very, very real. There's also blood diseases between different quote unquote races. Now, fortunately, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, or unfortunately, and I was told by some very wise people at a young age that race doesn't matter. And, it was a very racist place. I was called a N-word lover. I was called Asian love. At a young age, people bothered you if you didn't hang out with if you didn't hang out with your own kind, you're a lover of the other kind. And I never understood that. So I got over that at a very, very young age, and it was easy for me to accept the medical racism when I saw it instead of it being dismissed, right? But we could, if you want to get into what really the AIDS has nothing to do with what they're calling a virus is nothing but mitochondria. It's it's basically the part of the cell that holds the DNA. And they tell you it mutates. Mitochondria's got a pretty definitive shape. And if you want to get into some genetic theory, dendrochronology is bullshit. It has rings, right? That they count.
Total bullshit.
Yeah, but if you've got a big tree or whatever versus a small tree of the same genre, you could say the one with more rings is a little bit older, right?
Yes, you can.
Human mitochondria has the same thing. We have rings in our mitochondria. Some people got 4,000 or 5,000 rings. Some people got 30.
Wow.
And this is not discussed. On another level, we all have the same DNA. It just shows we came from a same mother, really. On another level. By the way, right now DNA testing is only being used by the legal community because it's all presumption. It takes over a month to do the 111 comparison test. And so they go into a legal thing, and after 10 days, we got DNA testing. It's all BS. Okay, we can get into the technical, making the technical easy. My whole thing is if I cannot explain it to an 8 or 9-year-old or a 5th grader, I don't want to talk about it.
That is absolutely what I promote on my channel. If something cannot be simplified to its lowest common denominator, you don't know your material.
That's right. Well, yeah, and also you're not communicating it well. In war, save the bullets. How do you defeat the enemy? By preventing them from communicating with each other.
That's right.
Right. And another thing in war, how do you defeat an army? By killing them or injuring them? Injuring them. Each injured soldier takes 2 other soldiers so it incapacitates the field. Right. Now, we don't have to get into a bunch of stuff with legal and law, but if someone wants to know what's going on in this country, write this down. It's called the Lieber Code or General Order 100. It was you've heard about executive orders and all that, right? Politically.
Right.
Well, executive orders is for the executive branch of government. The last general order was in 1863 by Lincoln, and it's called General Order 100. Now, if you didn't know when it was written or what it was called, and you read it, you'd say this is a transcript of everything that's going on today. It's called Operations of Armies in the Field. How do you deal with a civilian when you're military? How do you deal with civilian population? And that's everything that's going on. For example, what it did also, it got rid of the judicial system, which we do not have. What are the 3 branches of government? Corporations, media, and pedophiles. Anyway, no, it's supposed to be. It's the 3 branches are the executive, judicial, and legislative. Well, that was done away with because right now, if you go to court, it's all basically a military tribunal. What's going on is all the courts, the police, and all that are under the Attorney General, which is the executive branch, and they are conferred and confirmed by the legislative. The only place you will find a little smattering of judiciary left is in the Supreme Court. The problem with the Supreme Court, it's not a court of record, it's an appellate court. People say, well, Supreme Court said this, Supreme Court said that. I said, who cares? But the Supreme Court gives its opinion and decision and then kicks it down to the district court where they finalize it. They never tell you that. Right? It's an appeals court. It's not a court of record.
You were absolutely speaking the truth because my own prosecuting attorney was named Mark Vincent. I went to court to go sign for 90 days boot camp. My judge had just let a cop killer go named Marvin Bell. It was all over the news. I haven't really told a lot of this story of what happened, but I went to court to sign for 90 days boot camp. Victim's family was cool with it. Victim was cool with it. My participation was minimal, but Marvin Bell killed an HPD officer, and my judge, Judge Norman Lanford, was a liberal, and he let him go on a Miranda right violation. And HPD, Harris County, other judges, law enforcement, they were in a rage. So the day I go to court, My family couldn't even find a place to sit down because all the news agencies from the United States were all in there going, oh, wow, he just let a cop killer go. Is he going to let all criminals go? So me and about 250 people were all given hyperinflated sentences because he was trying to save his bench. His name is Norman Lanford. All this is verified in the news. But Norman Lanford was removed from the bench because he just sent everybody to prison after that. But what's interesting is what you said. My own prosecuting attorney, Mark Vincent, said, you really need to appeal this because this isn't the agreement that you and I had. And when I hired an attorney and we went through the appellate process, they literally told me, we're sorry, but the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals does not review matters of substance. All they want to know is, did they procedurally F you in the right way?
That's right.
Because we are not going to look at any matters of substance. We do not care what the issues were. And they sent me to prison. So anyway, it shocks me you say that because it's absolutely precise.
Well, this is how it works. And people, how is it a military tribunal, Greek? Well, this is how it's a tribunal. You have the judge, the prosecutor, and the clerk. And they're working together to get you to agree to everything that's on that penal bond. And once you agree to it, you're supposed to sign it off and go home. And they get paid because it's a public debt. Now, one thing, I had an attorney, by the way, I get into a lot of law stuff. And the only person I wanted to debate who did not want to debate me, he was in total agreement. I had lunch not once, but twice with a Supreme Court justice. His name is John Fitzgerald Malloy. Now, why are you name dropping that? I don't know who that is. Well, guess what? John Fitzgerald Malloy penned the Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. That guy. And he was in his 90s. This was over 20 years ago. And he basically said, yeah, that's right. It's not law at all. If you're in my courtroom, I have jurisdiction. I do what I want to do. Now, the judge is also the prosecutor. But what people don't understand how we got into this position. I had an attorney once, a friend of an attorney, tell me that this guy was studying the money system all his life. And he heard the Greek. And he says, the Greek laid it out in 10 minutes. So easy. Now I finally understand it. I want to just do that because everybody talks about for money and all that. Very simply.
Absolutely.
You have a private banking cartel, however you want to define them. And they've been trying to get under the United States and get over on the United States for a long, long time. Not until around the early 20th century did they start playing with this banking cartel. With the 1913 or so Federal Reserve Act, they let them in. But by 1933, the government lost the card game with the banking cartel, and the banking cartel bankrupted the United States and put them under receivership. So if you say the United States is bankrupt, a lot of people say, no, it's not. Well, it's in receivership after the bankruptcy procedure. Now, just to interject something, everybody's celebrating the 4th of July, July 4th, 1776. Okay, that's when the country was born. Well, when was the coroner's report written? Look it up. March the 9th, 1933. No one's talking about that. That's the coroner's report. March the 9th, 1933 is when the country died, and it went into receivership. What's receivership? Okay, Jason, you own an ice cream shop on Main Street, and you've been there for generations. Everybody defines Main Street as your ice cream shop. You get into some dealings with some people, and you lose the shop, let's say in a card game, or you borrowed money you can't pay back. You go into bankruptcy. But the people now that took over your shop, they're like, hey, why do we shut down this business? Let's just put it in receivership. Now, Jason, it's not Jason's shop anymore. We'll make him the manager and give him a little salary. We keep everything going, just the names change. Just like, for example, PepsiCo. They put out Pepsi, but they also got Taco Bell, Kentucky Fried Chicken. So when someone says, I went to Taco Bell, I say, you went to Kentucky Fried Chicken. No, I didn't. It's the same company. You know, these companies have subsidiaries, right? So the United States government now, they didn't let anyone know that they were doing this kind of dealing. So what they did is they put everything in trust. In 1990, James Traficant on Congress said, addressing Congress, which are trustees of the largest bankruptcy in world history, the United States government. Now, the government did not tell people that they were doing this. They were sending all the gold off in the 1930s to Germany. But they didn't tell the people.
That's what I've been telling everybody on Archaix TV. That's what I've been telling them. They bankrupted us. The Great Depression was refunneling American wealth to finance the German war machine.
Well, how did they bankrupt? Very simple. They went into a deal that the private bankers will print the notes at 6% interest. And once they gave all the bankers all the gold and all the silver, they still owed the 6%. And that's how they bankrupted them. But anyway, the government didn't tell everyone what happened. So what they did is they set up a trust, a commercial corporation that started off with your name in all capital letters, and they give you a number, social security number. And you could look up, it's kind of hard right now, but there's over a dozen in the United States Code, in the CFR, the Council, the Codes of Federal Regulation, and the Uniform Commercial Code. There's at least a half a dozen sections in there that say all debts belong to the United States. That means all bills, notes, bonds, payments to be made, dunnings, all these things belong to the United States. So essentially, when you deal with anyone corporate that asks for a social security number, they want to tap that trust. And since the money is fiat, whatever they send that trust through the Treasury at 11111 Congressional Way or whatever that's, they will pay it within 40 or something days. There's a lot of technical stuff that's involved. But what I'm trying to say is, let's say you get pulled over on a traffic stop, or you have insurance or a utility bill, if they have your social security number, they're tapping your trust and they're making you double dip and pay for everything twice. Now, people don't know this. Give you an example on how the money works. It's created off your signature. Jason, now let's give you this example first, and you'll see why we have the inflation real quick. Jason, I got a bank account and it's minus $100. Can I write you a check for whatever? No, can't do it. Now, if I put $100 in there to make it zero, can I write you a check for $10 or $20? Still can't do it, right? So if you go to the U.S. Treasury website, they're $30 trillion in debt. So how the hell are they sending out $1,200, $1,500 checks to people every 6 months during the thing? Okay, what's going on is this. You get the check, and when you sign the back, the money is created 10 times, because it's fractional reserve banking. So you get a $1,000 check, the bank creates 9,000 out of it. The bank keeps 30%. They send 30% to the government. They give you just the 1,000, and the other 20% that's left goes into some fund. And this is why they've created so many trillions of dollars by sending people checks. It doesn't make sense, but it's all in the codes. There's actually the Bill of Exchange Act, 1882. You could read that and you'll be like, oh my gosh, money comes from my signature. All I got to do is write the number down and write it in words and sign it, and it's good. That's right. In law, by the way, if you're in a credit-based economy and I'm asking you for money, do you know that I have to send you the check to pay for it also? You sign that check. It's called a voucher. That's why when you get a utility bill or a credit card bill on the bottom, doesn't say detach this and send this in with your payment. That's a check. You just don't know how to fill it out. So that's the crux of the money system, money creation. So basically, there's a verse that says it's the love of money that's the root of all evil. That's got to be true because there's no money anymore. It's all credit, and people still love it. They're not paying any attention at all, right? So we get into the money talk a lot. Now I want you to, pull this up, type this in and read it. It's real short. 12 USC 411. So it's basically Title 12, United States Code 411. You just type in USC or 12 USC 411.
Are you talking about lawful money?
Yep. Cornell, go ahead and click on it and read it real quick. Cornell, it's lawful. Go ahead and read that. It's about 2 sentences.
Let's see. This section of the U.S. Code defines Federal Reserve notes as obligations of the United States that are redeemable in lawful money. Lawful money is not further specified in the text.
Oh, okay. No, how about just 12 USC 411?
Okay.
12 U.S. In other words, it's Title 12, Section 411.
Section 411, issuance to reserve banks,
That's
nature
right.
of obligation.
Read that, yeah.
Says Federal Reserve notes to be issued at the discretion of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System for the purpose of making advances to Federal Reserve banks through the Federal Reserve agents as hereinafter set forth and for no other purpose are authorized.
Stop right there. That's written in 8th grade English. Federal Reserve note is a check, cash, whatever. Doesn't it say there that you're not authorized to use it? You ever wonder why? You ever notice that if you get pulled over and you got a bag full of cash, they take it and say it's contraband? Now, why are there serial numbers on the cash and on checks? Every financial instrument has a serial number. Because what you're supposed to do, if you continue reading it, Yeah.
Okay, the said notes shall be obligations of the United States and shall be receivable by all national and member banks and Federal Reserve banks and for all taxes, customs, and other public dues. They shall be redeemed in lawful money on demand at the Treasury Department of the United States in the city of Washington, District of Columbia, or at any Federal Reserve bank.
Excellent. Okay, so the reason you have social security numbers, serial numbers on all the instruments, no matter what they are, you're just supposed to keep financial records and write down the denomination or amount and the serial number of that instrument and show that you made a demand for lawful money. And you're supposed to go to the Treasury and they're supposed to give it to you, but they don't do that anymore. So if you do that, now you have they can't ask you to do duties, taxes, and all that if you have that on demand. You have to have it on record. You know, for example, a lot of people fear and talk about the IRS. It's the only agency that actually follows the law, believe it or not. Do you remember Charlie Brown, Charles Schultz? They used to do comic strips in newspapers.
Of course.
And there was one comic strip in the 70s where Snoopy sitting on his house with a typewriter. He says, Dear IRS, please unsubscribe me. And he was giving public notice of what's going on. IRS has a form. I'm not going to mention its number. It's actually Form 56. But anyway, you could download that, fill it out, and send it in, and you just unsubscribed. It's that simple. Now, but how come they're beating people up? They have a tendency every decade or so, they pick a famous person, Leona Helmsley, Nellie Wilson, the actor that played the Black Dracula, I forgot his Wesley Snipes. They pick a public figure and they beat him up publicly. Why? Because if you haven't unsubscribed and when you fill out anything from them, it says that you're doing it under the penalty of perjury, that you're a United States citizen, which literally means you're swearing you live in the District of Columbia.
Ah, I get it.
Yeah, yeah. But it's so anyway, if you make demands, there are many, many ways to deal with all of it, with everything that's going on. So I gave a little smattering of hints and things here and there, but one thing I didn't get into was the biblical perspective that we get into. And I know you've been leaning on that heavily lately for good reason. And if we have a little bit more time, I'll get into what I've been teaching on that.
Yeah, listen, a lot of my material in Archaics is straight out of the Bible because it does have historical value. It's got philosophical value.
Yes.
It even has spiritual value. It probably has legal value as well. But there's also narratives been attached to the Bible that were completely fictive and made up.
That's right. Now, here's the point. That this is a part. Now, I use the word pagan with certain adherents. Usually means ignorant, typically, and it's been that word's been captured and used as very denominational purposes, political purposes. All religions are political economic systems. But here, this is the point. I'll tell you how I came through the door, right? I was born in a Greek family, which is Eastern Orthodox, a lot of iconography and all that. I never thought it was true. The first impression I got as a child, I walked into a church and they had a big crucifix by the altar with a guy nailed to it wearing a diaper. And I saw that and I was like, well, they're saying that this guy was all about the truth. So I guess that symbol means that if you're all about the truth, that's what they're going to do to you, right? As a child, that was my reasoning.
That's some good reverse psychology if it's true.
Well, that's what reasoning I got as a child. I said, that's all bad shit. Now, fast forward 25 or so years, I went to this place, seminar. Guy was talking about law and money and government. And he says, well, we have all these corporate codes that we follow. I said, well, where do you get law from? He says, you get it from the Bible. And I was like, the Bible, don't you know that was written by Shakespeare? But, you know, I was like, I felt kind of bad telling that old man that because I never read the Bible. So I said, he said it's about law. So I'm going to go in there and find out where the laws are, and I'm going to start reading it. So I took it aside. I started reading. Now, I know Greek, and I learned the Hebrew, and I started reading it. And I was like, nobody ever told me this was in here. And the stuff that they're saying is in here is not in here. So what I talk about on the Bible is not whether it's true or who wrote it or whatever. Do we know what's in it? Because it's got this pagan aspect to it. Okay, you go into court, they have you put your hand on a King James Bible and you swear. Okay, so imagine this. You go in there and say, once you swear on the Bible, you say, oh, you know what? I got the whole thing downloaded on my phone. Can I swear on my phone? No, you can't do that. So it's become like this rabbit's foot, right? Right? The other thing is it's being used like a baseball bat. Give you an example. You know the Louisville Slugger, those baseball bats, they're canon. What I mean by canon is they're made by a certain specification and licensed by the baseball authorities, right, at a certain weight and length, right? But you know that more than 80% of baseball bats sold are not for playing baseball. Why? Because they make a damn good club. They make a cheap club. And that's when you see someone walking with a Bible under their arm, that's what they're using it as at you. And they come at you. I never like the stuff to say, well, that's Mark 17:39, Isaiah 46, 2 all beef patty, special sauce. You see, I'm like, what the hell? What kind of racket is this? What the hell's going on? Why don't we just read it and say what it says? So what I've been talking about is the identity crisis with the Bible, and it's this. I go and interview let's say 100 people on the street. This is the identity crisis here. And I say, do you know who Batman is? Talk about comics now, right? Yeah, I know who Batman is. Okay, I got a picture of various cartoon characters here on the wall. Could you please point to Batman? And all 100 people point to Mickey Mouse. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? That's Mickey Mouse. Oh, no, that's your opinion, man. That's not how, this is a misinterpretation. I said, as far as I know, Batman don't look like that. Batman didn't do, right? You see what I'm saying? We have an identity crisis. So for example, if you're going through the, you know, the first will be last and the last will be first. Revelation is the first book of the Bible. Is what I get into. And Genesis is the second. Now, if you get into the Hebrew, you know, they got 7 days or so, right? Well, you got ordinal and cardinal days in there. So let's say I got seven cars in my driveway, right, Jason? And I point to the first car. This is the first car, but this is the third car I bought. You see? So ordinal and cardinal, right? So in other words, I got 7 cars that I bought consecutively, but they're not in order of how I bought them. They're not parked that way. So when I'm describing them, this second car here, well, that's the 5th car that I bought, right? Ordinal and cardinal. But here's the point. When man is created, very simply, in that man and woman are created together, they're given a blessing, and they're told to repopulate the earth. That's the 6th day. A day is supposed to be 1,000 years, let's say. The 7th day, there's a Sabbath. Now we got, after the Sabbath, we got this creation. Actually, it's a formation, not a creation, of this guy called Adam. And he's made alone. He's by himself. And he's given a task. He's got to cut the bushes, take out the garbage, manage the garden, right? Now, when the woman comes up later, after they made him from him, are they given a blessing or is the earth cursed? Totally different story in the first 2 chapters. So we got, I call it 6th-day man and 8th-day man. Cain goes out there. He's terrified. He's sent to a city of refuge because the place is populated already. Right. Now, why the garden? Do you ever notice, no matter how many stories you read, even the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, that man always starts in a garden, always ends up in a city? When do you ever hear of a story of a city being destroyed? Gosh, that's all the time. When is the garden destroyed? Hardly ever, right? It's someone wrote to me earlier in the chat. It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. But anyway, so there's this stuff going on, you know. So you've got to be able to. So when you say like Bereshit bara et shamayim veheta aretz, and you start reading the Hebrew to someone, you can back up that you've done the research, right? And you're not just reading it from someone else. Now, here's the thing. The biggest identity crisis that we have, this is what I found, by the way. The Bible is kind of like K through 12, you know, education. By the way, they K through 12 is 12,000 hours of education. If you figure out the time and, you know, you're off for summer, all that crap could be taught in less than 300 hours. So why are they keeping you in there? But anyway, the Bible's like K through 12. The Old Testament's like 1st grade all the way to 3rd grade or 4th grade, 5th grade. The prophets get you out of high school. By the time you go into college, you're reading the New Testament. It's all cumulative. So when you get to college for math, Jason, you got your first year in college math. Your first day in class, do they say, okay, class, what's 1 + 1? What's 2 × 2? No. You're supposed to have that under your belt already, right? So here's the big catch, the identity crisis. I'm not getting into who wrote it or why, but do we know what's written in there? It's kind of like those, you know, they got those Haynes manuals for cars. You know how to fix your car, you know, on your own. You got to pay attention to what it says to do in there. You know, it doesn't matter if the car is, it doesn't matter at this point. So let's identify what we're saying here. So when you get to the New Testament, it's pretty much given that you know the laws and all this stuff. So let's say who I'm speaking to, I'm presuming they know all the biblical law. Let's get into the New Testament for a minute. So you notice that the Christ character, is brought up in prophecy throughout the scripture, right? All the way
Right.
on. By the way, well, let's just do the Christ thing, because I don't want to be here for too much. I could talk 8 hours just on this, on identity. Let's get an identity. Okay, so we get this. Let's just fast forward. The Judean, I didn't say Jewish, the Judean authorities, the southern part of Israel, the Judeans, their religious authorities arrest this guy, okay, and because of certain reasons he was deemed to be heretical, but because they're under occupation of Rome, they have to follow the pecking order. What is it? Chain of command. So they can't just go knock on the Caesar's door. So they go up to the king, the suzerain king, right? He's suzerain to the Romans, but he's still their king. He laughs it off, gives him a robe or whatever, whatever. And then they go to the prefect governor, Pontius Pilate, right? Prefect governor. Now, he's there to run Judea. And let me mention something. He's a military he's a branch of the military. Okay, he happens to be a historian, just like Tiberius Claudius Caesar was at the time. But here's the thing: if you're a colonel or a military attaché of any kind right now, and you go to a foreign country, they give you something called an area book, which describes you need to be well studied in the cultures and laws of the people, so you don't go there and create an international incident and look like an idiot, right? That still goes on today. So Pontius Pilate was special in this appointment, whether he existed or not, because he was very well read in those cultures. That's why he was sent there. There are records of him being close friends. They had history as a hobby with Claudius Tiberius Caesar when they were young. But anyway, they bring him to Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate sees what's going on, I'm paraphrasing here, and he washes his hands with a laver and he says, I don't see this man being guilty of why you're sending him here to me. I'll do the typical Roman thing. Now, washing the hands publicly is the ceremony of the red heifer in the law. In the law, the reason the red heifer was when a dead body was found, the elders of the area had to wash their hands to show that they didn't know anything of it or they were absolved of anything if found later. It's like a loophole. So that ceremony where he washed his hands was actually performing the red heifer ceremony. And then they still wanted him put to death. And he goes to the Judean authorities. You could read this in the book of John, the book of Mark. And he says, you have a law. I know you have a law. Use your law. The response from the Judean authorities is, how can we under Caesar? He says, you have a law. I know what it is yes, do it. Okay, so what is capital punishment under Judean law? It's not by crucifixion. Can't be. It's stoning. But here's the thing. If you go to Deuteronomy 20, now what was he accused of? One of the most heinous crimes. Murder and blasphemy were the most heinous things you could do in Judean religious economy. When I say economy, I mean it in terms of laws of the rules. So if you read in Deuteronomy 21, it even says the word son, you're to be nailed to a tree. Okay, so when you see that he was nailed to a tree during the stoning, and there was one man on his left, one man on his right. Now they can't receive. Now the crowd passed from the 3rd to the 9th hour, doing what? Hopscotch, patty cakes, throwing dice. Why were they there for so many hours passing through? The flesh was torn off of his body because he was front and center. But the guy on the left and the guy on the right of the almond tree, we know it's an almond tree because there's over 15 references to the almond tree in the Old Testament. Not the olive tree, the almond tree. As a matter of fact, Moses was told to make a 7-branch lampstand because it had a certain symbology, and you lit the top, right? And it was the likeness of an almond tree with its blossoms, so it means it's in the springtime. Anyway, he was given a robe from Herod, a purple robe. But why, before all of this started, the Romans cast lots for that robe? Because these men were killed for an accursed thing, and any accursed thing is to be burned to cleanse it. So they were given the whole roundabout what's going to happen, and they knew that robe would be piled up there and burned, and they cast lots to take it home. Now, he was not burned. He was spared that. That's why when you go read the part of the New Testament about the Last Supper, there's no Last Supper, it's the Passover. If you know the ordinance of the Passover, what you're supposed to do in that, you will see the conversation that went on during that time made complete sense about fire, about blood, and about this. But if you don't know what the Passover, okay, so what's going on? It's called lapidation, by the way, stoning, right? There's a lapidation that took place. The body was taken down. Yes, there was a pyre built up and burned. All of his possessions were taken up and burned also because, hey, Jason, how about this? We're there, and they killed this guy for stoning, the most accursed thing. Do you want his TV? Oh, no, that's an accursed thing. That should have been thrown in there and burned with him. That's why when he was up on that tree, he says, take care of my mother, because anything he had to be taken away and burned too. You see? So if once you understand the laws, you see the extension of the story, and you're like, wait a second. But what happens is we are so flooded with television, churchianity, images, all this other stuff, right? And when we read it in the Bible, we're like, oh, I saw this part in the movie. I saw this part in the movie. And we're not really reading what it states. My favorite is this movie. Well, it's actually a terrible movie. The only thing it showed was the right phase of the moon, was the 10 Commandments. Remember the 10 Commandments?
Yeah.
The movie, and they used special effects. Yes, Jello to open, and the Israelites crossed. They walked. Okay, hold on a second. If you go to Exodus 15 and you read that, and actually 13 and 14, they're the part of the world, southwestern Asia, Middle East, and they're at a confluent point known as the Sea of Reeds. That's where the salt water mixes with the fresh water, and it says a strong easterly wind blew all night. Now, if you go look at meteorology report, and around that time in the spring, and you will see that the temperature could go down to 20 degrees Fahrenheit or -6 Celsius. Okay, and the wind blew all night, and the Israelites were able to walk on that. It was divided, and they were able to walk on it as if it was dry land. Okay, now what were they doing? They were walking on an ice bridge. Now, when you're walking on ice, aren't you walking on water? I've walked on water before. Steam, water, and ice is water. Now that follows through. Now hold on. If you keep reading the story, morning came, the sun was out, Pharaoh pursued, but they fell to the bottom like a stone. Wait a second. And it says they fell to the bottom. Now, how can you fall to the bottom if you're already walking on the bottom? Can you answer that? You can't fall to the bottom unless you're up top. So what's crazy about it is when you read that text, now they don't have words for ice and snow.
It's a very good point. And I'm on board with all that because in my own research, I have found 3 separate bodies of groups of people leaving Exodus at the exact same time. And one of them went over land. And yes, they did cross that. They did cross there's plenty of evidence that they crossed over. That's very compelling. It's very compelling about the ice.
Yeah, but my point here is, let's just take what's out of the text, right? And is that usable? What picture do we get? You know what storybooks are? You get a script, and then they do a storybook which shows can we do a storybook? Can we do a storybook from what is written? And yes, we can. Like, for example, I could hold this true. There is not one image of the Ark of the Covenant online under images that is accurate, that you see the directions of what it should look like in the book of Exodus. Not at all. Go back and read it with an 8th grader that could draw, and tell them to sketch it out as it gives the specifications. It won't look anything like it at all. There's actually a seat or a chair on it for a very small person. But anyway, and there ain't no, anyway, here, give you an example. Two more things. You remember a few years ago, by the way, I subscribe to the Old Testament. That's my law form, right? Learn how to keep time. I'm not religious or anything, but it's my law form. Like, this is lawful, this is unlawful, right? Because the New Old Testament's all about how to keep time, not how to keep time, but how to go into contract, how to run your family, how you deal with government, how you deal with money, all this stuff. There's 600 laws in there. About 400 have to do with the priesthood, so not that many apply to you. But that's my judicial economy. So people knew that, and they call me the Old Testament kind of guy. And a few years ago, remember they were allowing they were taking the 10 Commandments out of courts, right? And they thought I would have a lot to say about that, right?
Right.
Remember? And I said, oh, yeah, you mean the 10 Commandments on stone, written on stone? And they say, oh, yeah, those. I said, well, what does it say? And they started reading off what the Christians think the 10 Commandments written on stone. I said, they could take those out. Those were never written on stone. What do you mean, Greek? Respect your mother and father, don't murder. I said, that's not in the 10 Commandments on stone. If you want to go look up the 10 Commandments, what was written on the stone when Moses came down with them, it's completely different. As a matter of fact, you know what the last commandment is, the one written on stone? Do not see the goat in its mother's milk. All men are to appear before me 3 times a year. How about this one? one of the, I think the seventh commandment is, you must ransom a donkey with a lamb, and if you don't, you are to break the donkey's neck. This is what was written on the stone.
This is in the book. This is in the book of Exodus.
Yes, 38. Exodus 38.
For the Ten Commandments, but the English, French, German, Portuguese translations, they all have what we've been told.
Well, actually, hold on. If you go to the Exodus 25, I believe, where the Christian 10 Commandments that everyone repeats, should not worship any other God, love mother and father, don't murder, the ones that the Christians say, okay, those were never written down on stone. What happened, if you read the setting, the Israelites were gathered at Mount Sinai, and he says, you all to come up with me to Mount Sinai, so you're a nation of priests. And the people said, oh, hell no, Moses. Are you kidding? No way. You go. We're staying down here. And then Moses says, okay, don't touch the mountain. If anybody touches it, they die, even if an animal. And by the way, no shoes, no shirts, no service. No.
So you're talking about the second series of commandments, not the first.
No,
series.
There's only one set that was written on stone. The one the Christians use are the first set that was never written on stone. There were verbal commands given to Moses because the people didn't want to go up with him. Completely different. It's just like no different than no shoes, no shirt, no service, right? You've seen like very short. Yeah, they were never written down. Well, they're written down in the book of Sefer in the Exodus, right? They're written down there. But if you look at what Moses brought down, it says you broke the first set. Now, write on the second set what you wrote on the first set. You read those 10 commandments, you're like, those aren't 10 commandments at all. So here's the thing: whether you believe in it or not, do we have? In other words, do you know who Batman is? And you say, yeah, and you come up here and point to Mickey Mouse, you don't know who well, you've been trained wrong. Okay. Now, right. So this is what I'm saying. It doesn't matter if it was written by Shakespeare. It doesn't matter when it was written or who. Are we talking about what's in the text? Are we talking about what's in the, and the answer to that is no. Now, once you understand this, for example, when they said, aren't you accept or taking the 10 commandments? I said, no, they're not written on the stone. Here's another thing that I get, right? When you're an Old Testament kind of guy, when Obama, they legalized same-sex marriage. Aren't you pissed about that? And I'm like, no, why should I be pissed about that? And they're like, well, because, you're an Old Testament guy and, that's a death offense, And I'm like, oh, why aren't you pissed, Greek? You're supposed to be pissed. And I'm like, no, I'm not pissed, because what they're doing when they make a law like that, they all go and register that they're same sex. When the law flips, when it flips and they start applying biblical law, because like you say, the Christian Reich is going to flip here. Hey, man, they don't have to go knocking door to door, do investigations. They got your ass on a roll down in City Hall. Do you see the point?
Yeah, I do.
So people that are like that, do not register or say that you are, because when it flips and they're going to start applying biblical law the way, like water, you can't live without water, but you know that more deaths and property damage is caused by drowning. Flood damage, right? You can drown a man face down in 2 inches of water, right? But you need water to live. What they're going to do is they're going to take the biblical law and they're going to apply it so harshly, right? Misinterpreted. So when you talk about the Christian Reich and they're talking about 10 commandments, they're talking about the no shoes, no shirt, no service. They're going to use things so harshly. This is one that gets Christians. With the open bleeding heart. By the way, when they say Jesus, I get confused because there's like 13 of them. When you say anybody says Jesus, I'm like, which one are you talking about? The one that if you don't believe in me, you're going to hell? Or the one with the bleeding heart, you could do anything you want because the blood of the Lamb? Or the other one that came off a spaceship? Which one are you talking about? Right? You see, so the word interpretation has to be accurate. Version doesn't. One thing when I start speaking on the Bible, I have to say, by the way, we're going to talk about the Bible, which there is no translation of the Bible. There is none. They're all versions. I just want to say that. And you know that, Jason, when you look up words. You recently been talking about the seals, and you brought up it's not properly translated. There is no translation. Now, I'm not religious. I don't even believe in it. I use it as my law form. Right? Now, here's the thing. I'm an atheist, Greek. I tried to do what you said, but I'm an atheist. I don't want to go to that book. I said, okay, so you're an atheist. So do you believe in the laws of the state? And they're like, yes, I do. Okay, then the state is your God and April 1st is your holiday. You see? where you get your law form, and it's been accepted. So this is the interesting point. There's so many points. There's nothing. Here's the thing. Less than one. If I said with very little exception, there are no Christians that know what I just said here at all. And I've gone into many hours and examples and showed how it was sewn together. Now, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, you would need whether it was done 300 BC or back then or whatever, you would still need a supercomputer to put together what's in there. Every 49th letter spells Torah in one direction, and then it does it in reverse in another book. And in the middle book, Vayikra, which is Leviticus, it spells YHWH every 7th letter. And in order to do that kind of code where every 49th letter repeats and every 7th letter code series repeats in another book, you would need a supercomputer to do that. Even that would have a hard problem. So I don't know how these guys figured it out. But one thing I do know, Jason, is that mankind did not start off in a cave. We started off very high technology. So either way, yeah, that's why here, we talk about the underground a lot. Okay, I'm gonna give you a scenario. I just built a new house, and I bought new furniture to go with my new 3-bedroom house, right? Is that okay with you, right? Okay, so we got the new house, and here comes all the new furniture. Here comes all the new furniture, and I'm going to direct that all those furniture movers put all the furniture on the roof, because I'm going to be living on the roof all year round. How's that sound? It sounds like you're fucking crazy. You live inside the house. Why? Because you're protected. You're sheltered from weather and all that. So when you see a surface of a world, and you've got inhabitants living on the surface freely, what a bunch of idiots. The advanced society goes inside the house, you see? And this is some of the stuff that I've been talking about for a long time.
Yeah, this is it's all very fascinating, and you have completely fried my circuits. I'm overwhelmed.
I could tell a little bit. That's
there is
fine.
It's not a situation where I'm not comprehending what you're saying. It is a situation where my mind is entirely absorbing each independent fact, and I'm already drawing all these necessary connections from my own material, from my own knowledge base. And yet, before I can actually put a full picture together, you've moved on. So I'm going to fully admit that this is probably one of the few videos that I'm going to watch multiple times in order to fully process everything that has been said. Because but I do want to stick to my little 2-hour venue here, because you are packing way more information in than the average person is going to be able to assess. I know that the people listening right now are going to be listening to this video multiple times, and your email is probably going to blow up.
Well, like I said, I'm only used to having 5 or 6 listeners, so that's fine. Yeah. I usually try to, if someone emails, I try to get back within 24 hours or the most 48. And I don't have a crew to assemble stuff. We have a crappy internet presence.
Right.
But you can contact me, and this is not what we get into is not for public consumption whatsoever.
It's not. I get
on
it.
the deeper stuff, especially when we get into see the Greek speak. What I call it, what I do is for doers. If you're just sitting on a keyboard all day and that's your job, you can't. If you got dirt under your fingernails, you know how to use a wrench. You build stuff, make stuff. You listen to a lot of the stuff that goes on in Greek, so you could use it, right?
Right.
And the main thing that I would leave off with is, when you live in a neighborhood, you go to this guy, he makes a good barbecue. This guy could fix your car, all this, right? What I suggest is people learning how to fix your bodies, what's called physiological medical stuff. You need a dentist. You know how they said people died at a young age years ago? That was because if someone insulted you, you had a duel with them. I went to a lot of ancient cemeteries, and people are tagged off 80, 90 years old. Nobody died there are a lot of people that died off young because someone insulted them, and they went out and duked it out, you see? That's why the reason why people are living longer is because sewer water and freshwater lines have been separated enough that even though the tap water sucks, you still get fairly clean water, and the sewer water is away, and dentistry. If you go look at late 1800s death certificates, cause of death, poisoning of the teeth. Poisoning of the teeth. So it's actually the dentists and the separation, all the cholera breakouts were so simple to fix because the sewer line and the water lines were running, one was infiltrating the other, right? So no matter how bad the tap water is, so when they said they had a pen, whatever, I said, that's bullshit because we got running water and sewer. There's no way you can have that. And if you want to know how to do a bubonic plague, it ain't the way they're saying. So, so anyway, what I suggest is people start learning. Find who in your neighborhood is good at, like, if you broke a leg or got cut open, or dentistry, or whatever. Because in the future, infrastructure goes down. You're not going to wait. You're not going to get the little yellow book that says health for medical surgery for dummies. Then no, you better
Right.
start now.
That's
Yeah.
absolutely correct.
Yeah, and I'm pretty soon going to be in my 60th year, right? So whether I'm around for that or not. Now, I've been giving a different thing. By the way, the Christ was, when he was born, it's not December 25th. It was the 11th day of September, 3 BC. That's in the astronomical thing. That's why they had that big birthday party for him on September 11th, right? Are you familiar with that astrologically?
No, but I have
Okay.
11 or 12 different sources from the ancient world that show that Jesus was born between 3 and 2 BC.
Yeah. Well, in the book of Revelation, it gives a very specific astronomical alignment. 5 astronomical bodies, which gets it down to 20 minutes. 2 astronomical bodies gets it down to half a day. 1 gets it down. Well, I'm sorry. 2 astronomical bodies gets it down to a week. So the more astronomical bodies you have, the finer it gets.
Yeah.
So anyway, we get into all this other stuff. Now, I'm not saying I believe in it. You should believe in it. It's true or not. But are we talking about what's in the book itself? No different than, don't tell me you know who Batman is and you point to Mickey Mouse on the wall. We got a problem there. But you go ahead with your friends and you think that, but we're not talking about the same thing. That's why I
agree. I agree 100%. I believe 100% Jesus was here. He walked this earth. He did that thing. But we do have, I know historically of 3 separate Jesuses that were all living at the same time.
Right.
And
Well,
none of them really have a life like the gospel Jesus.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not saying he was here or not. I'm saying, are we talking about what's memorialized in the text? There's a lot of info in there if we read it objectively, and I find no one is, and that's what we get into. I'm not telling, the answer is, when they asked me, they thought I'd be upset taking the 10 Commandments and what they're doing with same-sex. I couldn't care less. But I'm telling you why it's being done, kind of like what you do. So that's why I think a lot of the narrative that I have and what you have dovetail well together. And thanks for having me.
I agree. Listen, there's a few takeaways here. I just want to itemize just to show you and my community that I was paying attention. And one of the first things that drew my attention was your mention of the kittens and how the kittens seem to already have their programming. And by extension, that would be all of nature. And we're talking about visceral programming. We're talking about things that the animal kingdom seems to already innately know. And yet humans, babies are absorbing from their environment, and they're watching and they're analytical, but you almost are promoting simulation theory without saying it.
Well, we're in a
everything
simulation.
other than the observer, everything else is a part of the environment. So,
well, we could further this on some other time. I have a lot of in-depth analysis on what electricity is, what they're calling nuclear.
Oh yeah, we definitely have discussions in the future. I'm just doing some bullet point takeaways. Like, simulation theory is what came to my mind when you were talking about that. I just didn't want to interrupt. Just like the Torah code. Your mention of the Torah code. I've read Michael Drosden. I studied his book back when I was really into it, and that too is evidence of a simulated construct. That something had written that Torah that was highly developmental, something very sophisticated, put those codes in.
Well,
in the
I'm
text.
not talking. I had an edition of that, and I put Emerson's Moby Dick in there, and it did the same thing it did for the Bible. I'm talking about a different kind of code with just letters specifically, not words.
Right.
It's a mathematical. The other thing is with the 2178 as some kind of a fantastic number that we're in a simulation. Before I heard you on that, I thought it was Capricorn's number. I don't know if you're familiar with Capricorn's number. It's with a K. You could look it up. That was a magic number that any 4-digit number you through 7 steps always goes back to 6174. So that number 6174 was considered a magic number, and you brought up 2178. Anyway, we can go on and on and on.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the body
me.
as a vacuum. That was another takeaway. Never heard that concept.
Yes.
All right.
Biological vacuum.
The separation between the soul and the spirit. I'm gonna have to look more into that. You blew my mind on something so simple because I have machinist history as well. And geometry is also my thing. I'm showing examples on my channel a lot. But something so simple as holding up a plumb line from a window in a building, looking at other architectural constructions miles away, something so simple, because if we're truly on a sphere, the plumb line will show it.
Exaggerated, big time.
Wow. I say, how come I've never seen anybody, not even the flat earthers told me anything like that. So it's amazing. What was that? Oh, this has nothing to do with you, but Bob Collins, I saw you in the chat from Moscow, Texas. I pass through Moscow, Texas all the time to go visit my buddy Barry, a part of the Office project. Reach out to me, man. We drink some coffee or something. Also, I just want to make the words nice and opinion. You educated me on some things. I'm eager to learn more about how we've been deceived in our vernacular and the meanings of words. And I want to sum up. And I want to sum up this entire video with a message to my community that, guys, listen, I'm not easily impressed. I'm not easily impressed. You know my history. You know the breadth and scope of my material. You also know my shortcomings. But I'm going to tell you that the signature of genius is always the ability, the art of abbreviation, the ability to not only condense a tremendous amount of information into a small period of time, but also the ability to communicate it in comprehensible terms. And that's exactly what this man has done. So I want to close this video and thank you for being my guest. If there's anything that you want to say before we check out, now's the time to do it.
Oh, no, we're good. Thanks for the flowers.
Yeah. Well, we're not dating, but yeah, you earned it. Yeah, man. All right, guys, I'm going to check out. I got some food on my mind. And I'm going to hit this beautiful outro, and I will see you guys next, because tomorrow we're going live. We're going to be talking about the Shroud of Turin.